December 17th, 1944. The crossroads village of Vith, Belgium, sat wrapped in frozen fog so thick that visibility dropped to less than 50 yards. Staff Sergeant Charles Hensel pressed his eye against the periscope of his M10 tank destroyer, scanning the ghostly tree line to the east, where German armour had been reported moving through the snow-covered Ardennes forest. His breath formed ice crystals inside the turret as he waited, listening to the distant rumble that every American tanker had learned to recognize with dread. The deep, unmistakable growl of heavy German tanks approaching through the winter darkness. What Hensel and his crew from the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion didn't yet understand was that rolling toward their position were not ordinary Panzers, but Tiger tanks from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion, 56-ton mobile fortresses, whose 88mm guns could destroy American vehicles from ranges where return fire was impossible. The Germans advancing through the Ardennes believed their armour was invincible, their offensive unstoppable, and the American defenders before them already broken by 3 days of relentless assault. Within the next 30 minutes, that certainty would shatter against a tactical reality the German High Command had failed to anticipate. American tank destroyer crews, who understood that defeating superior armour required not matching it ton for ton, but refusing to fight on the enemy's terms entirely. The story of how a handful of thinly armoured American vehicles stopped a Tiger company at Vith begins not with tanks or tactics, but with a fundamental miscalculation about what American forces could withstand and what German armour could accomplish in terrain that stripped away every advantage heavy tanks supposedly possessed. In mid-December 1944, the strategic situation on the Western Front appeared deceptively stable. American and British forces had liberated France and Belgium, reaching Germany's border after months of grinding combat that had pushed German forces back from Normandy to the Rhine. Allied commanders anticipated that the war would end by early 1945, with German industrial capacity collapsing, fuel supplies exhausted, and veteran formations shattered beyond recovery. This assessment was simultaneously correct in the long term and catastrophically wrong in the immediate present. German High Command, led by Adolf Hitler himself, had assembled a secret reserve force of 28 divisions, including elite Panzer and Volksgrenadier units, for a desperate counter-offensive aimed at splitting Allied armies and recapturing the vital port of Antwerp. The plan, codenamed Wacht am Rhein, called for German armour to punch through thinly held American lines in the Ardennes forest, cross the Meuse River, and drive northwest to the sea, cutting off British and Canadian forces in the north from American units in the south. The Ardennes was deliberately chosen because Allied intelligence considered it unsuitable for large-scale armoured operations. The heavily forested terrain, narrow roads and hilly landscape theoretically prevented rapid tank movement, leading American commanders to station inexperienced or exhausted divisions in this quiet sector, while veteran units rested or prepared for offensives elsewhere. German planners counted on this exact assumption, betting that surprise and overwhelming force concentrated on a narrow front could achieve breakthrough before Allied reserves could respond. On December 16, 1944, at 5:30 in the morning, German artillery opened fire along an 80-mile front in the Ardennes. 2,000 guns bombarded American positions for 90 minutes, followed by infantry and armour attacks that crashed into units that had received no warning of the impending assault. American forces, outnumbered in some sectors by ratios exceeding 10-1, fought desperately to slow the German advance while commanders scrambled to understand the scale of the offensive. Vith, a small Belgian market town of fewer than 3,000 residents, sat astride a critical road junction where 7 highways converged. Control of Vith meant control of the road network necessary for moving supplies and reinforcements through the Ardennes. German operational plans required capturing Vith by December 17th at the latest to maintain the offensive's momentum. American commanders recognized this immediately and began rushing whatever forces they could scrape together to defend the town. The 7th Armoured Division received orders on December 16th to move from reserve positions in the Netherlands and defend Vith. The division's Combat Command B, under Brigadier General Bruce Clark, arrived in the early hours of December 17th and established defensive positions in a rough arc east and north of the town. Clark had approximately 50 Sherman tanks, assorted armoured vehicles, and supporting infantry to hold against German forces that intelligence estimated included at least 2 Panzer divisions with hundreds of tanks. Among Clark's defenders were elements of the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion, equipped with M10 tank destroyers mounting 3-inch guns in open-topped turrets. The M10 was not the fastest or most heavily armed American tank destroyer. That distinction belonged to the M18 Hellcat, but it possessed adequate mobility and a gun powerful enough to threaten German armour when employed properly. The crews manning these vehicles understood their doctrine thoroughly. Use mobility to reach threatened positions quickly. Engage from prepared defensive positions where terrain provided advantage, and inflict maximum damage before withdrawing if overwhelmed. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The M10 tank destroyer represented American pragmatism in armoured vehicle design. Where German engineers built specialized vehicles optimized for specific roles, American designers created platforms that balanced multiple capabilities within resource and production constraints. The M10 emerged from a 1942 requirement for a vehicle that could destroy enemy tanks while remaining simple enough for rapid mass production. The chassis was essentially a modified M4 Sherman hull, using the same suspension, drivetrain, and automotive components that were already in mass production across multiple factories. This part's commonality meant mechanics trained on Shermans could service M10s without additional instruction, and spare parts flowed through the same supply channels. The upper hull structure was completely redesigned, replacing the Sherman's cast turret and vertical armour with a welded hull featuring sloped plates and an open-topped rotating turret. The 3-inch M7 gun that armed the M10 was derived from an anti-aircraft weapon, modified for the anti-tank role by adding a longer barrel and higher velocity ammunition. Firing a 15-pound armour-piercing round at approximately 2,700 feet per second, the 3-inch gun could penetrate approximately 3.5 inches of vertical armour at 1,000 yards. Against the side or rear armour of most German tanks, this was sufficient for reliable kills. Against the frontal armour of Panthers or Tigers, it was marginal at best, requiring either close range or precise shot placement against known weak points. The M10's armour protection was deliberately minimal to save weight for mobility. The frontal glacis plate was 2 inches thick, sloped at 55 degrees, providing effective thickness equivalent to approximately 3.5 inches of vertical armour. Side armour was 3/4 of an inch. This was adequate protection against machine gun fire and shell fragments, but any dedicated anti-tank weapon could penetrate easily. The open-topped turret, while controversial, saved approximately 3 tons of weight that went into automotive performance and allowed crews to bail out rapidly if the vehicle was hit. The psychological profile of tank destroyer crews differed markedly from tank crews operating Shermans. Tank destroyer doctrine emphasized aggressive offensive action, with battalions held in reserve until enemy armor threatened breakthrough, then rushed forward to blunt the attack. This meant tank destroyer crews spent less time in grinding infantry support missions and more time specifically hunting enemy armor. The specialized mission attracted volunteers who preferred the clarity of seek, strike, destroy over the ambiguous multi-role employment of standard tank units. Training for tank destroyer crews emphasized speed of engagement and tactical flexibility. Crews learned to read terrain for positions offering covered approaches and clear fields of fire. They practiced rapid displacement drills, moving to alternate positions after firing to avoid enemy artillery retaliation. Most critically, they trained extensively on German tank identification, learning to recognize Panthers, Tigers, and assault guns by silhouette and sound signature, understanding the armor protection and weak points of each type. By December 1944, American tank destroyer crews in Europe were veterans who had learned brutal lessons about German armor capabilities. The Normandy campaign had taught them that frontal engagements against heavy German tanks usually ended with destroyed American vehicles. Successful engagements required patience, positioning, and willingness to let German tanks pass by concealed positions to enable flank shots against thinner side armor. The crews defending Street, Vith understood these realities intimately. The Tiger tank that German forces were deploying in the Ardennes offensive represented the apex of German heavy armor design and the nightmare that haunted American tankers. Development of the Tiger began in 1941 when German forces in the Soviet Union encountered heavily armored KV-1 tanks that proved nearly immune to German anti-tank weapons. The requirement called for a breakthrough tank mounting the 88mm gun already proven effective in the anti-aircraft and anti-tank roles, protected by armor thick enough to withstand Soviet guns. The resulting vehicle, designated Panzer Kampfwagen VI Tiger OSV, entered production in August 1942. At 56 tons combat weight, the Tiger was nearly twice as heavy as a Sherman tank and substantially heavier than any previous German production tank. The frontal armor was 4 inches thick on the hull and turret faces, effectively impenetrable to most Allied tank guns at combat ranges. Side armor was 3.5 inches thick, still formidable protection that required careful shot placement to defeat. The Tiger's main armament, the 8.8 cm K-36 litres 56 gun, could penetrate over 4 inches of vertical armor at 1,000 yards, making it capable of destroying any Allied tank from ranges well beyond effective return fire distance. The gun's accuracy and the Tiger's sophisticated optics allowed experienced crews to achieve first-round hits at ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. In defensive positions with clear sight lines, a single Tiger could dominate terrain that would require multiple Allied tanks to control. The Tiger's operational reality was far more complex than its impressive specifications suggested. The overlapping road wheel suspension, while providing excellent ride quality, was prone to accumulating mud and snow that froze solid in winter conditions, immobilizing the vehicle until crews could chip away the ice. Fuel consumption was catastrophic, approximately 100 gallons for every 60 miles traveled, and, by late 1944, German fuel supplies were critically short. Mechanical reliability was poor compared to Allied vehicles, with transmissions, final drives, and engines requiring constant maintenance that German field workshops struggled to provide. Most critically, Tigers were rare. Total production across the entire war reached only approximately 1,350 vehicles. German panzer divisions in the Ardennes offensive each possessed at most one company of Tigers, typically 8 to 14 vehicles, compared to hundreds of Panthers and Panzer IVs. This scarcity meant Tigers were employed carefully, concentrated at critical breakthrough points where their firepower and protection could achieve maximum effect. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion deployed to the Ardennes with approximately 30 operational Tigers, organized into 3 companies. The battalion's mission was to spearhead the advance of the 5th Panzer Army, using the Tiger's firepower to smash through American defensive positions and open routes for following mechanized and infantry units. Battalion Commander Major Heinrich Lang was a veteran who had fought on both the Eastern and Western fronts, understanding his Tiger's capabilities and limitations thoroughly. German tactical doctrine for Tiger employment emphasized positioning and fire discipline. Tigers advancing in the attack moved cautiously, using terrain features for cover while searching for targets. Commanders avoided exposing their vehicles unnecessarily, preferring to engage from hull-down positions where only the heavily armored turret was visible to the enemy. When Tigers did advance in the open, they relied on their frontal armor to absorb enemy fire while their guns systematically destroyed opposition. The psychological impact of Tigers on Allied soldiers was substantial and well documented. Tank crews who encountered Tigers often reported feelings of helplessness, watching their shells bounce harmlessly off German armor while 88mm rounds destroyed their vehicles with single hits. Infantry facing Tigers frequently withdrew or surrendered unless supported by specialized anti-tank weapons or overwhelming numbers. German commanders understood this psychological advantage and deliberately emphasized Tiger presence in propaganda and tactical planning. By December 17th, German forces advancing on Street Vith had already achieved significant tactical successes. American units defending the initial assault positions had been overwhelmed, with some regiments suffering 70% casualties in the first 48 hours of fighting. Survivors retreated west towards Street Vith, attempting to establish coherent defensive lines, while German armor exploited gaps in American positions. German commanders were confident that one more concentrated push would break American resistance and open the road network for deep penetration toward the Meuse River. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion received orders to attack Street Vith from the east on the morning of December 17th. Intelligence reported American defenders holding positions outside the town, but German staff officers estimated these were remnants of shattered units without significant anti-tank capability. The plan called for Tigers to advance along the main highway, suppressing resistance with direct fire while infantry cleared flanking positions. Once American defenders broke, following units would pour through the gap and continue west. This assessment was partially correct and fatally incomplete. American defenders at Street Vith were indeed a mixed force of units that had been battered by 3 days of fighting, but among them were tank destroyer crews who had trained specifically for exactly this scenario. Enemy armor concentrated for breakthrough, attacking along predictable routes, confident in their technical superiority. The Americans lacked the armor or firepower to match German tanks in direct combat, but they understood terrain, possessed defensive positions prepared over the previous 12 hours, and most importantly, refused to fight the battle German commanders expected. The morning of December 17th dawned grey and bitterly cold, with temperatures well below freezing and thick fog blanketing the Ardennes valleys. Visibility ranged from 25 to 75 yards depending on terrain elevation, with fog thickest in low areas along streams and roads. These conditions severely limited the effectiveness of German optics and long-range gunnery, stripping away one of the Tiger's primary advantages. Staff Sergeant Charles Hensel's M10 tank destroyer occupied a prepared position approximately 800 yards east of Street Vith, hull down behind a slight rise in terrain with only the turret exposed. His crew had spent the night improving the position, using shovels to carve away frozen earth and create a ramp that allowed the M10 to back down, behind cover rapidly after firing. 2 other M10s from his platoon occupied similar positions to his left and right, spacing themselves approximately 200 yards apart to avoid presenting a concentrated target for German artillery. Hensel had been briefed that German armor was approaching, but intelligence couldn't confirm specific types or numbers. Reports ranged from a few Panthers to an entire Panzer division. In the pre-dawn darkness, Hensel's crew had loaded their ammunition racks with a mix of armor-piercing and high-explosive shells, test-fired the gun to verify the breech mechanism functioned properly in the cold, and reviewed their withdrawal route in case the position became untenable. At approximately 07:30 hours, Hensel heard the sound that made his stomach clench, the deep rumble of heavy tracked vehicles approaching from the east, accompanied by the distinctive high-pitched squeal of overlapping road wheels that identified German armor. The fog was too thick to see anything beyond 50 yards, but the sound grew steadily louder, multiple vehicles moving in column formation along the highway. Hensel grabbed his radio handset and reported contact to his platoon leader, Lieutenant Robert Hoffman, whose M10 was positioned 300 yards to the north. Hoffman acknowledged and passed the report up to company headquarters, then ordered all crews to hold fire until targets were identified and within effective range. Firing too early would reveal American positions without guarantee of achieving kills, and tank destroyer doctrine emphasized that first shots needed to count. The first Tiger materialized from the fog at approximately 07:40 hours, emerging like a massive grey ghost barely 75 yards from Hensel's position. The vehicle was moving slowly, perhaps 10 miles per hour, with its commander visible in the open turret hatch scanning forward through binoculars. A second Tiger followed 30 yards behind, then a third, the column advancing nose to tail along the highway without infantry scouts or flanking security. Hensel's gunner, Corporal James Mitchell, whispered identification over the intercom, Tiger, 75 yards. 11 o'clock. Hensel could see the massive vehicle clearly now. Turret traversed slightly left. 88mm gun elevated slightly above horizontal. At this range, the M10's 3-inch gun had a reasonable chance of penetrating the Tiger's side armour, which was 3.5 inches thick compared to the 4 inches protecting the frontal arc. But Hensel didn't give the fire order. Not yet. Because behind the first 3 Tigers, more shapes emerged from the fog. A 4th Tiger. A 5th. The German column was longer than expected. More vehicles than 3 M10s could engage simultaneously. If Hensel's platoon fired now and only disabled 1 or 2 Tigers, the remaining German tanks would locate the American positions and systematically destroy them with return fire. Lieutenant Hoffman's voice crackled over the radio, calm but urgent. Hold fire. Let them pass. We take them from behind. The tactical decision was sound but required extraordinary discipline. Hensel watched the Tigers rumble past his position, close enough that he could hear the squeal of bogies and smell diesel exhaust. His gunner kept the turret traversed to track the nearest Tiger, finger hovering near the firing button, waiting for orders that didn't come. 6 Tigers passed Hensel's position, followed by 2 Panzer IVs serving as company support vehicles. The column continued west toward Street. Vith, German crews buttoned up inside their vehicles, unaware that American tank destroyers sat concealed less than 100 yards from the road. The rumble of engines faded slightly as the lead Tigers moved into the fog ahead, creating the separation Hoffman had been waiting for. All units, fire on my command. Rear targets first. Hoffman's voice was steady. 3, 2, 1, fire. 3 M10s fired simultaneously. 3-inch guns roaring as 15-pound armour-piercing rounds crossed the gap at over 2,000 feet per second. Hensel's gunner had targeted the rearmost Tiger, aiming for the junction between turret and hull, where armour was thinner and ammunition storage made hits potentially catastrophic. The round struck exactly where Mitchell aimed, penetrating the Tiger's side armour and detonating inside the fighting compartment. The Tiger lurched to a halt as internal explosions blew the turret hatches open, flames erupting from the commander's cupola. The crew bailed out within seconds, scrambling away from the burning vehicle as ammunition cooked off with sharp cracks that echoed through the fog. The other 2 M10s achieved similar results, their targets stopping abruptly as armour-piercing rounds penetrated vulnerable side plates. But now the remaining Tigers knew American anti-tank guns were nearby. German crews couldn't pinpoint exact positions through the fog, but muzzle flashes had given approximate bearings. Hensel was already screaming, "Back, back," as his driver threw the M10 into reverse, tracks churning as the vehicle rolled backward down the ramp they'd prepared. 15 seconds after firing, Hensel's M10 was hull down behind the rise, only the turret top visible from the road. The German response was immediate and overwhelming. Tiger guns traversed toward the suspected American positions, and 88mm shells began slamming into the terrain where Hensel's M10 had been. High-explosive rounds detonated on impact, throwing frozen earth and shrapnel in all directions. One shell struck the exact spot Hensel's vehicle had occupied 20 seconds earlier, creating a crater 4 feet deep. Lieutenant Hoffman's M10 wasn't as fortunate. German gunners spotted movement as his vehicle withdrew and fired 3 rounds in rapid succession. One shell missed, passing overhead with a sound like tearing canvas. The second struck the M10's engine deck, penetrating thin armour and disabling the vehicle instantly. The third hit never came because Hoffman's crew bailed out immediately, abandoning the smoking tank destroyer and scrambling into a nearby drainage ditch as German machine gun fire kicked up snow around them. 2 M10s remained operational. Hensel and the platoon's third vehicle, commanded by Sergeant William Braun, were still concealed and mobile. The odds had just shifted dramatically against them. 4 Tigers remained operational in the German column, now alert and searching for targets, with more armour potentially approaching from the east. American doctrine in this situation was clear: withdraw to alternate positions, report contact, and wait for reinforcements or artillery support. Hensel keyed his radio, expecting orders to pull back. Instead, Hoffman's voice came through, slightly breathless from his sprint to cover. Charlie 2, this is Charlie 6. Reposition north 200 yards and engage from flank. Charlie 3, shift south same distance. Crossfire on my command. The order was tactically sound, but required both remaining M10s to maneuver through fog while German Tigers searched for them, then achieve precise positioning for coordinated fire. Hensel acknowledged and signalled his driver, who began carefully backing the M10 further from the road before pivoting north. The movement was agonizingly slow, perhaps 5 miles per hour, because faster movement created noise and visible disturbance that German observers might detect. 3 minutes elapsed as Hensel's M10 crept north along a farm track. Turret traversed toward the road to maintain situational awareness. Through gaps in the fog, Hensel could see Tigers had halted and were scanning systematically, main guns elevated slightly to search terrain features where anti-tank guns might hide. German infantry had dismounted from half-tracks further back in the column and were beginning to advance, on foot, attempting to locate American positions. At 07:52 hours, Hensel reached his new position, an abandoned farmhouse that provided cover for his M10's hull while allowing clear fire lanes toward the highway. Sergeant Brown reported reaching his southern position 30 seconds later. The 2 American tank destroyers now had Tigers positioned between them, creating a crossfire situation where German armour would present side or rear aspects no matter which direction turrets traversed. Hoffman gave the order, fire when ready. Disable, don't wait for kills. Hensel's gunner engaged the nearest Tiger, which sat stationary approximately 300 yards away with its turret traversed searching north. Mitchell aimed not for a killing shot but for the Tiger's tracks and running gear, components that could be damaged with high explosive shells without requiring armour penetration. The 3-inch gun fired, the high explosive round detonating against the Tiger's left track, severing the heavy steel band and disabling the vehicle's mobility. The Tiger immediately pivoted on its remaining track, bringing its 88mm gun toward Hensel's position with frightening speed. But Sergeant Braun's M10 was already firing from the opposite direction, his armour-piercing round striking the Tiger's rear engine deck, where armour was only 1 inch thick. The German tank shuddered as the engine compartment erupted in flames, thick black smoke pouring from ventilation louvers. The tactical situation had devolved into close-range chaos. 2 Tigers were burning. 2 more were disabled with track damage but still capable of fighting, their turrets traversing frantically searching for the American tank destroyers that kept appearing, firing, and vanishing into the fog. German infantry was spreading out from the road, attempting to flank suspected American positions, but the fog that concealed American vehicles also prevented German soldiers from coordinating effectively. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. Hensel repositioned again, moving west towards Street Vith, while maintaining distance from the highway. His ammunition was running low, 7 rounds remaining of the original 30 loaded that morning. Braun reported similar supply status. They couldn't sustain this engagement indefinitely, and more German armour would arrive once commanders realized the lead elements were pinned down. At 08:05 hours, American artillery began falling on the highway east of Street Vith. Forward observers with the defending infantry had called in fire missions once the engagement started, and now 105mm shells were detonating among the stalled German column. The artillery wasn't accurate enough to target individual Tigers, but it forced German infantry to seek cover and prevented more armour from advancing to support the embattled lead company. The Tigers that remained mobile began withdrawing, commanders recognizing they'd lost tactical surprise and were fighting at a severe disadvantage in terrain that negated their advantages. 1 Tiger covered the withdrawal, maintaining position with its powerful gun, deterring American pursuit while damaged vehicles were recovered or abandoned. By 08:20 hours, the German column had pulled back 600 yards, leaving behind 3 burning Tigers and 1 disabled vehicle that would be recovered after dark. The engagement at Street Vith on December 17th lasted approximately 50 minutes from first contact to German withdrawal. American forces reported destroying or disabling multiple heavy German tanks with losses of 1 M10 disabled and 1 crew wounded. German records confirm losing 4 Tigers from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion's 2nd Company, with additional vehicles damaged but recoverable. The tactical impact was immediate. German forces approaching Street Vith encountered determined resistance where they'd expected demoralized remnants. The road junction that was supposed to fall by midday on December 17th remained in American hands. German timetables for the Ardennes offensive, already stressed by unexpectedly strong American resistance elsewhere, slipped further behind schedule. The psychological impact cut deeper. German crews, trained to believe their Tigers were virtually invincible from frontal fire, had watched American tank destroyers destroy their vehicles from ambush positions using terrain and tactics that negated German advantages. The aura of Tiger invulnerability, carefully cultivated through propaganda and tactical success on the Eastern Front, eroded measurably with each burning Panzer. American defenders drew different conclusions. The engagement proved that proper tactical employment of tank destroyers could defeat technically superior German armour when terrain and visibility limited German advantages. Crews learned that patient positioning mattered more than rushing to engage, that coordinated crossfire created opportunities impossible in single-vehicle duels, and that mobility used for repositioning between shots was as tactically valuable as mobility used for pursuit. The Battle of Street Vith continued for another 6 days, with American forces holding the town until December 21st, when encirclement forced withdrawal. The 7th Armoured Division and attached units, including tank destroyer battalions, inflicted severe delays on German forces, costing the 5th Panzer Army nearly a week of operational tempo that it never recovered. The defence of Street Vith became one of the critical American successes of the Battle of the Bulge, demonstrating that even with tactical surprise and overwhelming force, German armour couldn't simply smash through prepared American positions. The M10 tank destroyer that served at Street Vith represented American design philosophy refined through 3 years of combat experience. When development began in early 1942, American engineers faced the same problem their German counterparts had confronted: how to create vehicles capable of defeating increasingly well-armed and armoured enemy tanks. German engineers responded by building specialised heavy tanks like the Tiger that could dominate through superior firepower and protection. American engineers took a fundamentally different approach. The American tank destroyer doctrine emerged from observations of German blitzkrieg tactics in France and the Soviet Union. German success depended on concentrated armour breaking through defensive lines and exploiting deep into rear areas. American planners concluded that the best counter was not matching German armour quality, but creating specialised units capable of rapid deployment to threatened sectors. This required vehicles that prioritised mobility and firepower while accepting minimal armour protection. The M10's design reflected these priorities ruthlessly. The 3-inch gun provided adequate anti-armour capability against most German tanks when properly employed. The open turret and relatively thin armour saved weight that translated into better automotive performance and faster production times. The use of Sherman components meant the vehicle entered mass production quickly, without requiring entirely new manufacturing infrastructure. Between September 1942 and December 1943, Fisher Tank Arsenal and Ford Motor Company produced approximately 6,406 M10 tank destroyers. Additional production continued at other facilities through 1944. This production scale, impossible for specialized heavy vehicles, meant American tank destroyer battalions could be equipped and deployed globally while maintaining a steady flow of replacement vehicles as combat losses occurred. The crews manning M10s at Street Vith were products of a training system that had evolved significantly since early American engagements in North Africa. Initial tank destroyer training emphasized aggressive pursuit and direct engagement doctrine that proved costly when American units encountered German armor for the first time in Tunisia during winter 1942 and 1943. Early engagements saw tank destroyer battalions suffer heavy casualties, trying to fight Panthers and Tigers in terrain that favored German defensive tactics. By late 1943, American training doctrine had shifted dramatically. Tank destroyer schools emphasized patience over aggression, positioning over pursuit. Crews learned to read terrain for positions offering covered approaches, clear fields of fire, and multiple withdrawal routes. They practiced coordinated fire with other tank destroyers, creating crossfires that forced enemy armor to expose vulnerable side or rear aspects, regardless of which direction they oriented. Most critically, crews learned German tank capabilities and limitations in exhaustive detail. Training films showed captured Panthers and Tigers from multiple angles, highlighting armor thickness variations, vision port locations, and mechanical weak points. Gunnery instruction emphasized the importance of shot placement over raw penetrating power, teaching crews that a well-aimed round striking thin armor was more effective than a poorly aimed shot bouncing off thick frontal plates. The psychological preparation proved as important as technical training. Tank destroyer crews were taught to expect encountering enemy armor with superior guns and armor. Rather than viewing this as insurmountable disadvantage, training emphasized that tactical employment could overcome technical inferiority. Crews internalized the doctrine that seeing first, shooting first, and repositioning quickly gave them advantages that compensated for lighter armor and less powerful guns. By December 1944, American tank destroyer battalions in Europe were veteran formations that had refined their tactics through combat experience in France and Germany. The 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion that fought at Vith had participated in operations across France following the Normandy breakout, accumulating institutional knowledge about German armor tactics and effective countermeasures. This experience proved decisive when German forces launched their Ardennes offensive. Continuing Part 1. The German perspective on the street. Vith engagement, reconstructed from unit records and post-war interviews with survivors, revealed a force that had badly underestimated both American defensive preparation and tactical competence. The 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion entered the Ardennes offensive with high morale and confidence born from successful defensive operations on the Eastern Front during summer and fall 1944. German crews believed their Tigers' technical advantages would prove decisive in breakthrough operations. The 88mm gun could destroy any American tank from ranges exceeding 2,000 yards. Frontal armor was effectively immune to American tank guns at combat ranges. German doctrine emphasized these advantages, training crews to engage from positions where American return fire would be ineffective. What German training hadn't adequately prepared crews for was American tactical doctrine that refused to accept German-defined terms of engagement. Vith, American tank destroyers didn't attempt frontal duels at long range where Tigers dominated. Instead, they used terrain and limited visibility to close range, positioned for flank shots and coordinated fire to create situations where German armor advantages became irrelevant. The fog that blanketed the Ardennes on December 17th played a crucial but often overlooked role in the engagement. German crews depended on superior optics and long-range gunnery to exploit their firepower advantage. Visibility limited to 50 yards stripped away this advantage entirely, reducing engagements to close-range encounters where the M10's 3-inch gun could penetrate Tiger-side armor reliably. German after-action reports from the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion described the Vith engagement as encountering well-prepared anti-tank positions, employing coordinated fire from concealed locations. Battalion Commander Major Heinrich Lang noted in his report that American defenders demonstrated tactical proficiency that exceeded expectations based on intelligence assessments. The loss of 4 Tigers in a single engagement represented a significant blow to a battalion that possessed fewer than 30 operational vehicles at the start of the offensive. German tactical assessments struggled to reconcile what happened at Vith with their understanding of American capabilities. Intelligence reports had consistently portrayed American tank destroyers as lightly armored vehicles, suitable primarily for defensive ambush but vulnerable in mobile warfare. The assessment was technically accurate, but missed the critical insight that defensive ambush was exactly what terrain and visibility conditions in the Ardennes favored. German crews who survived the engagement reported that American fire appeared to come from multiple directions simultaneously, creating the impression of a larger anti-tank force than actually existed. This perception was a deliberate result of American tactical doctrine. The three M10s that engaged the Tiger column repositioned between shots, firing from different locations to prevent German gunners from fixing their positions and to create crossfire situations. The psychological impact on surviving Tiger crews was measurable. German tankers trained to rely on their armor's protective qualities found that American guns could penetrate side plates at close range. The sense of invulnerability that thick frontal armor provided eroded when engagements occurred at distances where armor thickness variations mattered less than shot placement and tactical positioning. Major Lang's battalion spent December 18th attempting to reorganize and integrate replacement vehicles from maintenance units. The Tigers lost at Street. Vith couldn't be quickly replaced because German production capacity was limited and spare vehicles were allocated carefully across multiple fronts. The battalion entered subsequent operations with reduced strength, affecting its ability to execute breakthrough missions that required concentrated armor. For American forces defending Street, Vith, the engagement provided tangible proof that properly employed tank destroyers could defeat German heavy armor despite technical disadvantages. This knowledge spread rapidly through units defending the Bulge's northern shoulder, improving morale among crews who had spent 3 days watching German armor advance, seemingly unstoppably. The 814th Tank Destroyer, Battalion's action report, filed after American forces withdrew from Street. Vith, on December 21st, documented the engagement in clinical military language. 3 M10 tank destroyers engaged enemy armor column consisting of Tiger tanks and supporting vehicles. Destroyed 4 enemy tanks, confirmed damaged additional vehicles. Own losses: 1 M10 disabled, crew recovered. Ammunition expenditure: approximately 40 rounds, 3-inch AP and HE. The report's appendix included tactical lessons learned that would be distributed to other tank destroyer battalions. Primary among these was emphasis on patient positioning over hasty engagement. Crews that waited for German armor to pass their positions before firing achieved flank shots that were tactically decisive. The fog that limited visibility, normally considered a disadvantage for defenders, actually benefited American tank destroyers by negating German advantages in optics and long-range gunnery. The report also noted ammunition. Considerations: M10 crews at Street Vith had access to both armor-piercing and high-explosive rounds, allowing them to select appropriate ammunition for each target. Against Tiger side armor at close range, armor-piercing rounds achieved penetration and catastrophic kills. Against tracks and running gear, high-explosive rounds proved effective for mobility kills that disabled enemy vehicles without requiring armor penetration. General Bruce Clark, commanding the 7th Armored Division's defense of Street, Vith, mentioned the tank destroyer action in his operational summary. Tank destroyer elements attached to this command performed their mission with distinction, engaging superior enemy armor under difficult conditions and inflicting losses that contributed materially to delaying enemy advance. The broader strategic context of the Street Vith engagement revealed its significance beyond immediate tactical results. German operational planning for the Ardennes offensive depended on rapid advances that would reach the Meuse River within 48 hours of the initial assault. Every hour of delay allowed American forces to rush reinforcements into threatened sectors and establish defensive positions that German armor had to assault rather than bypass. Street Vith's road network made it a critical objective that German forces couldn't simply bypass. The town sat astride the only roads capable of handling heavy military traffic through that sector of the Ardennes. German commanders needed Street Vith to maintain supply lines for units advancing west and the inability to capture it on schedule created traffic congestion that backed up for miles behind German lines. American forces held Street Vith until December 21st, 4 days longer than German planning allowed. This delay, combined with stiff resistance at other key positions like Bastogne, meant German spearheads never achieved the breakthrough momentum required for operational success. By December 23rd, when weather cleared and Allied air power returned to full operation, German forces were still fighting for objectives they were supposed to have captured in the offensive's first 2 days. The defense of Street Vith cost American forces heavily. The 7th Armored Division suffered approximately 3,000 casualties and lost substantial equipment during the 6-day battle, but the division accomplished its mission, delaying German forces long enough for American reserves to establish defensive lines further west that German armor never penetrated. Tank destroyer battalions attached to the 7th Armored Division lost approximately 20 vehicles during the Street Vith fighting, including M10S, M18 Hellcats, and towed 3-inch guns, but they claimed destruction or disabling of over 40 German tanks and assault guns, an exchange ratio that American commanders considered favorable given the tactical situation. The German failure to maintain their offensive schedule had cascading effects. Fuel shortages, already critical due to Allied strategic bombing of German petroleum facilities, became catastrophic as German armour sat immobilised in traffic jams caused by road network bottlenecks. Panzer divisions that were supposed to be racing toward the Meuse instead consumed their limited fuel reserves, moving short distances through congested terrain. By January 1945, the Battle of the Bulge had decisively turned in American favour. German forces withdrew from their maximum penetration points, abandoning hundreds of vehicles that had run out of fuel or broken down. The offensive that was supposed to split Allied armies and recapture Antwerp instead consumed Germany's strategic reserve without achieving any operational objectives. The lessons American forces drew from the Ardennes fighting, and specifically from engagements like Street Vith, influenced tank destroyer doctrine for the remainder of the war. Units learned that tank destroyers performed most effectively when employed according to their design philosophy, held in reserve until enemy armour threatened breakthrough, then committed decisively to threatened sectors. Attempts to use tank destroyers as substitute tanks for infantry support missions had proven costly throughout 1944. Their thin armour made them vulnerable to German anti-tank guns and artillery that tanks could survive. But in their intended role, hunting enemy armour from prepared or semi-prepared positions, tank destroyers achieved results that justified their specialized design. The M10 itself was increasingly supplemented by more capable designs as the war progressed. The M36 tank destroyer, mounting a 90mm gun, entered service in fall 1944 and proved capable of reliably penetrating Tiger and Panther frontal armor at combat ranges. The M18 Hellcat, with its superior mobility, performed exceptionally in situations requiring rapid repositioning between multiple firing positions. But the M10 remained in frontline service through war's end, equipping numerous tank destroyer battalions that fought across Germany in early 1945. Its combination of adequate firepower, acceptable mobility, and proven reliability made it effective enough that wholesale replacement wasn't justified given production priorities. The tank destroyer concept itself came under scrutiny as the war ended. Critics argued that specialized anti-tank vehicles were unnecessary when improved tank guns could provide similar capability. The debate centered on whether separate tank destroyer battalions represented efficient use of resources or whether integrated combined arms teams mixing tanks, infantry, and artillery achieved better results. Post-war analysis generally concluded that American tank destroyer doctrine had been vindicated by results. Tank destroyer battalions achieved favorable loss exchange ratios against German armor throughout the European campaign. The ability to concentrate anti-tank capability rapidly at threatened points proved valuable in fluid operations, where enemy armor breakthrough attempts required immediate response. However, the analysis also noted that tank destroyer effectiveness depended heavily on proper tactical employment. Units that attempted to fight like tanks, engaging in prolonged direct fire duels, suffered disproportionate losses. Units that adhered to doctrinal principles of mobility, positioning, and first-shot kills achieved success that justified the specialized vehicle designs and separate battalion organizations. The street, Vith engagement encapsulated these lessons in miniature. 3 M10 tank destroyers, properly positioned and tactically employed, defeated a Tiger company through coordination, terrain exploitation, and refusal to accept German-defined terms of engagement. The action demonstrated that technical inferiority in individual vehicle performance could be overcome through superior tactical execution. The crew members who fought at Street Vith returned to combat operations as soon as their units were reconstituted. Staff Sergeant Charles Hensel remained with the 814th Tank Destroyer Battalion through the final campaigns in Germany, participating in the crossing of the Rhine and the drive into central Germany during spring 1945. His crew was credited with 5 confirmed tank kills during the war, including the Tigers engaged at Street Vith. Lieutenant Robert Hoffman, whose M10 was disabled during the engagement, recovered with his crew and returned to duty after the battalion received replacement vehicles. He was awarded the Silver Star for his leadership during the Street Vith action, the citation noting his tactical skill and personal courage in engaging superior enemy forces under extremely difficult conditions. Sergeant William Braun, commanding the 3rd M10 that participated in the engagement, survived the war and later provided detailed accounts of the action to military historians, studying tank destroyer operations. His descriptions of the engagement emphasized the importance of crew coordination and the psychological stress of allowing German armor to pass American positions before engaging from behind. The German perspective on Street Vith evolved as the broader Ardennes offensive failed. Initial reports treated the engagement as a temporary setback caused by unexpectedly strong American resistance, but as German forces withdrew in January 1945, having failed to achieve any operational objectives, commanders recognized that delays like Street Vith had been strategically decisive. Major Heinrich Lang survived the war and was interviewed extensively by American and German historians about the 501st Heavy Panzer Battalion's operations. He acknowledged that German tactical assumptions about American capabilities had proven incorrect, stating in a 1948 interview, "We believed our technical advantages would prove decisive. We learned that tactics and terrain can overcome technical superiority." Post-war, many M10s were transferred to Allied nations as military assistance. British forces had operated M10s throughout the war, designating them as Wolverine and sometimes refitting them with British 17-pounder guns to create more capable tank destroyers. French forces received M10s that served into the 1950s. Yugoslav and other armies operated M10s into the 1960s in secondary roles. The legacy of tank destroyer doctrine and the vehicles that embodied it extends beyond their direct military impact. They represented American pragmatism in weapon design, accepting limitations in some performance areas to achieve advantages in others. They validated the principle that specialized vehicles optimized for specific missions could outperform general-purpose designs when properly employed. The crews who manned these vehicles, fighting enemy armor with equipment their opponents considered inadequate, demonstrated that training, doctrine, and tactical skill could overcome material disadvantages. This lesson resonated throughout military organizations, influencing how armed forces approached the eternal challenge of defeating enemies who possessed superior individual weapons or platforms. December 17, 1944, when Staff Sergeant Hensel's M10 engaged Tigers in the fog outside Street Vith, marked one of thousands of small unit actions that collectively determined the Battle of the Bulge's outcome. No decisive breakthrough occurred that day. No dramatic reversal of strategic fortune, just a handful of American tank destroyer crews executing their doctrine properly, inflicting losses the German offensive could not sustain, and buying time measured in hours that accumulated into days of delay. Those hours and days proved sufficient. By Christmas 1944, The German offensive had stalled permanently, its spearheads dozens of miles short of operational objectives, its fuel exhausted, its momentum broken against American defences that held where German planning assumed they would collapse. The strategic reserve Germany had assembled for one final desperate gamble was consumed without achieving any lasting result. The tank destroyers that fought at Street Vith were representative of thousands of American crews who faced German armour throughout the European campaign. Their story illustrates how tactical doctrine, when properly executed by trained personnel using equipment designed for specific missions, could achieve results that raw technical specifications suggested were impossible. The three M10 tank destroyers that ambushed a Tiger company on a foggy December morning in Belgium did not win the Battle of the Bulge, but they contributed to the cumulative resistance that denied Germany the rapid breakthrough its operational planning required. In that contribution lay validation of American tank destroyer doctrine and proof that wars are won not just by superior equipment, but by superior employment of whatever equipment is available. The German commanders who watched their Tigers burn in Belgian fields learned a lesson they would have preferred to avoid. Technical excellence in weapon design matters less than tactical excellence in weapon employment. American tank destroyer crews learned a different lesson. Properly trained soldiers using adequate equipment and sound doctrine could defeat enemies who appeared overwhelmingly superior on paper. Both lessons remained relevant long after the specific vehicles and circumstances that taught them had passed into history. The fundamental principle that mobility, positioning, and tactical coordination can overcome raw firepower and armour protection continues influencing military thinking decades after the last M10 fired its final round in combat. The crews who fought at Street, Vith and countless similar engagements throughout the war proved that principle through performance that doctrine predicted but skeptics doubted. Their legacy endures not in museums where surviving M10s sit preserved as historical artifacts, but in the tactical manuals, training programs, and operational doctrines that still teach soldiers to fight intelligently rather than simply relying on superior equipment. The tank destroyers are gone. The lessons they taught remain. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.